But I want to start out today by asking a couple questions. When was the last time you went and visited with a widowed man or a woman? Not someone who maybe is in your own family, and you're at a family event, so yeah, you just talk to them, but you just went because. Just to spend time with them, to become like family, to look out for them, to give them something to look forward to. When was the last time you did it? Or second question, when was the last time you gave of your busy life to go spend time with a child or a teenager who is missing one or both parents? Don't have a father, don't have a mother, maybe don't have either. Not because you had to, but again, because you choose to give of yourself, to invest your life and your love into that person. You know, I have to say, if we're honest, most of us, we have to think hard to remember the last time we've done that. Either of those things. And which is kind of surprising because we look around and widows and orphans, they're all around us. Widows, people who have lost a husband or a wife. Orphans, people who have lost a parent, don't have parents in their lives. They're parts of our everyday lives. We see them every day, and so sadly it becomes normal and we just kind of start overlooking them. But the numbers of widows and orphans that compose society, they are just staggering. Get this, 150 million orphans in the world. That's what it's estimated to be, 153 million. That doesn't include children who have parents but can't really depend on their parents. The parents don't really take care of them. I think of when I was in Haiti, the second time we went and we were at the orphanage a couple days working, and so we saw some of the people at that orphanage and some of the kids, and there were lots of kids, and we would see some of them, and the people worked there, some of them, they told us these kids have parents. But the parents are too poor to take care of them. So they take them to the orphanage just so the kid can get fed. Or they live up in the mountains, where there's no resources, there's no school, so they bring the kids down to the orphanage in town, so to at least give them that. But these kids, they've got parents, but there's no one there to watch after them, no one there to comfort them, no one really there to take care of them. Or get this, 245 million female widows in the world. That's just the females, not the males. 115 million of whom live in poverty. And they suffer from social isolation. They suffer from economic deprivation. It's a worldwide condition. But it's one we see in our own backyards. I mean, literally, I go out to this backyard sometime and people, walking by in the alley or whatever back there, I've spoken to both widows and orphans. In fact, some of you sitting here today might fit, or at some point in your life have fit, one of those descriptions. So it's here. It's not just on the other side of the world. It's here. The crisis is here. Many of these orphans and widows all around the world and in our own backyards, they've got no one to take care of them. And so they're poor and they've got no way out. Parents or spouses who help take care of them, they're not there anymore. They've disappeared from their lives. How do we address that? I mean, that's the question, because our God certainly weighs in on this topic. So if God is telling us something, we as his followers should have a response to what's going on here, especially when we read our Bibles and we see over and over and over again that God has this passion to demonstrate his power and his love and his care in the lives of those in need. And as we consider the plight of the poor today in our church, because that's what we're doing, because in our previous hour, in our counterculture study, many of you were there, we talked about the poor and our response, what it should be to the poor. So as we talk about the poor, I just want to walk you through some of the scriptures about what they say specifically about widows and orphans, because they're two of the most valuable, two of the poorest populations in our world right now. Show us, Jim, from Deuteronomy chapter 10. The Lord your God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. God is the defender of orphans and widows. And notice here, there's a third thing here too. He's talking about the foreigner. He's talking about immigrants. And it says God defends them, and he gives them clothes and food. And we're told they live among you. Look at that. But that's not all. Jim, show us the next one from Psalm 68. This one's a great, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. So God is here. He's saying again, I defend the widows. But look what he's saying now about the fatherless, the orphans. He's saying, I am their father. God says, when there is no one else around to take care of, to watch after, to love these poor, wonderful children, I will do it myself. I will be their father. Now, it's not up there, but in Psalm 6, the psalmist goes on to say, God places the lonely, the orphans, and the widows. He places them in families. And if you've never been part of a family or you've been isolated from your family before, you know how important families are in your life. And you know what it's like to kind of be displaced from them. God says, I put them in families. This is special care from God that he talks about widows and orphans. He doesn't say this about the rich, the people who have everything they need. He doesn't say this about people who have lots of friends and family to help them get by. No, he says this about widows and orphans. How important are they to God? Take a look at this. Jim, show us from Exodus chapter 22. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused. So now God, he's kind of a little bit step by step. God's going from saying, this is who I am, this is my character, I'm the one who takes care of the widows and orphans. And little by little, he's filtering down to the people, us, his followers, those who recognize him. And he's saying, all right, now I want you to live in my character and how you view these types of people too. Don't you dare take advantage of them. If you do, and they cry out to me, I'm going to hear them. And then you get verse 24, it's a warning. God says, man, if you take advantage of them, my anger is going to be aroused against you. What is it like to have God against you? So this is what he's saying. There seems to be this holy respect, this holy protection for those who have lost family members on whom they depend for their care. But God's not done developing this theme yet. Jim, show us from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17. God declares to the people, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. See, through the prophet Isaiah, God continues his case for the widows and orphans. And now it's about the people, us. We are instructed to do certain things. We're instructed. That's what it means to do right. This is what it means to seek justice, to take up the cause of widows and orphans. See, not only are people to respect widows and orphans, but the people are commanded to take care of them, to fight for them. You want to do something right in this world? Well, then you go out and put your time and your efforts and your resources into fighting the cause for the orphans. You want to seek justice in this world? Then you go out and you not only consider the plight of the widows, but you lobby for their protection and their care. You make sure it gets done. You know, there are a lot of Christians in the United States right now, and we've all got political opinions, right? Everyone's got a political opinion nowadays. But a lot of Christians have political opinions, and they'll spout them, and it seems to go exactly against what God is commanding us here. Take care of the widows and orphans. It's not an option. Taking care of widows and orphans and those who can't take care of themselves. It's what God instructs his people to do, so that you're doing right and you're seeking justice. If you're not doing this, you're not doing right. We're not doing right. If we're not doing this, we're not being the ones who bring justice to this world as God would have us be. But there's a reason God instructs us this way. Jim, show us from James chapter 1, verse 27, one of my favorite books of the Bible, James. But he gives us this. Religion that God, our Father, accepts as pure and flawless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted in the world. True religion, or worship, that God accepts as pure. It's the good stuff. It's not merely participating in monotonous, superficial, pious activity. You see, in the American church, we come to our comfortable worship services in our comfortable church buildings. And if it's too cold, what do? Well, someone needs to turn up the heat. And if it's too warm or stuffy, well, someone needs to jack up the AC, right? And so we're comfortable, and we sing all our favorite songs. And if they're not our favorite songs, and heaven forbid it's a song we don't like, we make sure we tell someone, make sure that doesn't happen again, right? And then we come with our Bibles and our pretty Bible covers and our pens and our highlighters and all our stuff, our God books, and we come to a fun, or at least hopefully interesting, Sunday school or Bible study or small group meeting or some such, and we'll gladly sample all the wonderful foods at the church potluck, making sure to visit the dessert table once or twice or 8 times if you're me, and we're happy and stuff. But that's not where it's at according to James. Sure, those things are important. They strengthen our Christian community. They put us on the path to worshiping and to seeking and to glorifying our God, which is what we're here to do, but it's only half the picture. It's not true. It's not pure. It's not complete. See, that picture is not complete unless within all that, what are we doing? We are looking after, we are visiting the orphans and widows in their distress. See, our worship is incomplete unless we're doing that. We think about this, and we think about just how often we pay attention to orphans and widows in our society. We see how often we are bringing before God a sacrifice of incomplete praise. See, true religion consists of just and consistent demonstration of supernatural, selfless love. Rather than being polluted by the world and its ideas about money and status, what's that? We cater to the wealthy, right? And we ignore the poor. That's what we do. True worshipers are called to look after, to visit orphans and widows, because that phrase we have there, look after, that's the same phrase in the original language that is used throughout the New Testament to talk about how God visits his people. God visits his people to help them, to encourage them, to strengthen them. Looking after or visiting widows and orphans means we seek them out with deep concern for their welfare and a clear commitment to care for their needs. That's what's being said here. We help them. We strengthen them. We encourage them by visiting them, by looking after them, the same way God visits us. You can't do that with minimal effort. Widows and orphans desperately need someone to step in and provide physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual sustenance. True religion is to love people like that. People, well, who benefit you the least. They really can't do anything for you. True religion is to become family to those who've lost family. That's what's being said here. This way of looking at orphans, widows, and people who can't take care of themselves, this is a completely countercultural way of doing things, because the way God views and treats widows and orphans, and he calls us to treat and view widows and orphans, completely different from how the world does. How's the world view and treat widows and orphans? I went looking this week for some headlines to show us, and I found some. This from April 20th, so just 10 days ago. Children discovered on the brink of starvation in Belarusian orphanages. Oh, that's how we treat the orphan. Okay. Or this one from just this Wednesday. Sex scandal in Russian orphanage. Graduate opens up on years of mass pedophile abuse. Oh, that's how we take care of orphans. Unless you think it's just different countries. This one from December 29th. Opioid orphans. Foster care systems in U.S. buckle under weight of drug epidemic. So we got issues, and so now we have more orphans, and we're just not, we don't care to put enough resources toward taking care of them. So the system is buckling. It's not just orphans. Here's this headline: The World of the Widow, Grappling with Loneliness and Misunderstanding. And this is one of my favorites from the New York Times. The New York Times. Parents advised to abandon children in order to secure mental health services. This is the 1-2 punch, right? No, we don't care about kids, just abandon them, make them orphans. But do it so you can get mental health help. You got a mental illness and we're not going to help you. It's just like we don't care. See, our culture often encourages us to ignore widows and orphans and people who can't take care of themselves, or to at least marginalize them, put them off to the side. Maybe every once in a while you pay them some lip service. Maybe every once in a while you write out a check to some organization that supposedly takes care of them. Or a couple times a year you might donate some items to something or donate some food or something. But that's it. That's all. Certainly not this idea of becoming family to those who have lost family that we see in the New Testament. We wouldn't say it out loud, but the prevailing attitude is that these types of people can't do anything for us. So there's no use putting time or effort into them. We've got other things to do with our money, other things to do with our resources, other things certainly to do with our time. So hey, going with Pastor Mark once every 3 months to visit at Sugar Creek Rest, the elderly, many of whom are widows, not my thing. Or we've actually been talking in the deacons and deaconesses meetings lately about starting up again our visitation program at the high-rise. About 10 years ago now, we used to go one Sunday a month and we'd send out pairs of people to each floor to knock on doors and visit people in their apartments to get to know them, to be part of their lives, to give them something to look forward to. Yeah, the elderly at the high-rise, many of whom are widows. But we said, well, we can't really do that now. We can't commit to that because we don't have the commitment of people in our congregation to be there and do that ministry properly. Or go to today's Clarion Association meeting in Katanning. We've announced it the past couple weeks where the topic is learning how to minister to the elderly in your congregation. And no one's going with me. It's going to be nice weather, Pastor Mark. Or how about this? Thursday evenings. Spending my evenings, Thursday evenings at the youth center, ministering to the young people, many of whom come from broken families, don't have both parents, might not have either parents in their home. Thursday evenings, that's when my shows are on. See, we look at this and we see opportunities abound. And just here at East Brady Baptist Church, things we've already got going on in our own backyard. Opportunities to love the widows. Opportunities to love the orphans. But as James puts it, we're all polluted by the world. And we ignore them. So often we just ignore the widows and orphans. I think sometimes we ignore them is because we're just overwhelmed by the numbers. Like we talk about the big numbers, right? Hundreds of millions of widows, hundreds of millions of orphans. But each and every single one of them, each and every child, every woman who has lost her husband, every man who has lost his wife, that's someone for whom God possesses divine compassion. It's not a question of what we should do. God's told us what we should do. We know what we should do. The question is, are we going to do it? So what's your response to all this going to be? What is our response going to be? Because it seems God doesn't give us the opportunity to just keep doing religion as usual. No, he calls us to do what is right and to seek justice. What will this congregation's response be? How will we seek to love and care for orphans and widows in our community and around the world? And whatever it is, it can't be just the pastor standing up front some Sunday saying, we're going to do this, and one or two people showing up to carry the burden. That doesn't get the job done. No, it's got to be the people coming together with passionate love for God and passionate love for other people to do it. You see, we read about the early church in Acts chapter 4, verses 33 and 30 through 35. Let me read to you what's there. God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. There were no needy persons in the early church. That's astounding to begin with. Why? The church was taking care of them. The church was taking care of the poor. Chapter 6 tells us that widows are among the poor that the church was helping to take care of. And they did it by coming together and contributing their resources together. We have to respond together. Otherwise, why has God put us together as a congregation? But there's also this question of what are you going to do personally? Beyond the congregation of East Brady Baptist Church, what will you do as an individual or maybe as a family or a household to respond to this? Maybe there's a widow or an orphan, someone who doesn't have parents or both parents in your neighborhood, and you can adopt them. You can invite them into your lives, spend time with you and your family and your household. You can visit them. You can become part of their lives. You can make sure their needs are met. You can become their family. It will take work and commitment. Or maybe through an organization like World Vision or Compassion International. You can sponsor an orphan or a widow in another country that's struggling to get by. Jim, show us the picture here. This is Tithi. Tithi Bitswas, I really don't know how the last name's pronounced. She lives in Bangladesh. Her 8th birthday is in 27 days. And I've sponsored her for 3.5 years. But that kind of puts a face on it. What will your response be to the widow and orphan crisis in today's society? I want to encourage you to respond, but don't respond because things I've said have made you feel guilty. Because number one, our Lord Jesus Christ does not deal in guilt. He came and died to take guilt away. I want you to know that if you respond out of guilt, well, your guilt is eventually going to be taken away, and so your response is going to go away. And you're just going to continue as usual. I want to urge you to respond out of love today. Love of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because the gospel, it is all about God's great love for every single one of us. And every person out there who comes to faith in Jesus Christ. It compels us to willing, joyful, urgent, faith-driven, grace-saturated, God-glorifying work on behalf of the poor. In this case, the widows and the orphans. I urge you today to love and care for the widows and orphans around you in your community and around the world. Not because you have to, but because you love God and you are eager to see Him glorified in this world. Let us pray.